Hello, it's the Dean of Vino-Versity again. Continuing with the theme of champagne, we did part 1 and part 2 in the prior video, and now I just want to do part 3, which is really basically the idea of answering a question that I get asked all the time, which is, why is champagne so expensive? Like, what is the big deal? There's sparkling wines from all over the world, and I could go buy a $10 bottle or just even find stuff that's from different countries, and I don't understand it. What makes it so special? That's the question. So I thought a good brief explanation of that exact answer will help you pick out bottles when you go to your favorite store or restaurant. In a basic nutshell, there are sparkling wines made from all over the world. Anytime you make wine, anytime you ferment sugar into alcohol, which is taking the grape juice, which has sugar in it, the yeast, which is floating in the air, it floats right down and it starts eating the sugar, and it literally converts it into alcohol and bubbles. That is literally called fermentation. So every time yeast cells, which are invisible, but they're out there, every time they eat that sugar and convert it and you get alcohol, you also always get carbonation. You get CO2, bubbles. Very often, though, as we drink our regular table wine, obviously they let the bubbles just float out and dissipate, so you don't experience them. But there is a process where you can actually capture them inside the bottle and make sparkling wine. So, in the history of sparkling wines, which again occurs naturally, sometimes it occurs inside a bottle. Sometimes the yeast itself gets trapped. They'll let the bubbles float out. You get flat wine. You put the flat wine in the bottle and you cork it. But lo and behold, there's a little bit of yeast still in the juice that is pretty much, say it's dormant. It's kind of just taking a nap. And then inside the bottle, it wakes up and it's like, hey, I'm hungry, and I'll just eat up whatever sugar I find inside floating in the bottle. It ferments again, and it basically produces alcohol and CO2 again, but this time it's inside a bottle. And that's really like the natural method or the ancestral method of making sparkling wine. But ultimately, there's a way to do it deliberately and sort of not by accident, by waking up the yeast, which was sort of an unintentional thing. In the history of the Champagne region, a lot of people credit Dom Perignon, who was a monk who lived in the mid to late 1600s. They credit him with inventing champagne. So he didn't invent champagne. Champagne is a region, so he didn't invent the region. He lived in the region. But basically, one of the things he did, really try to condense it, he was a master agriculturalist, and he went around the Champagne region understanding. He was one of the first people to understand that when you grow grapes in different parts of a vineyard or a plot, a whole estate, or even a whole village or a whole region or a whole, country, every time you change locations, again, could be 20 yards, could be 20 miles, something can change, whether it's elevation or the population of, vegetables and flowers and herbs that grow naturally, or whether it's just even the soil composition. A lot of things can change, and that's called the terroir. And anything that changes in terroir will give you different flavors inside the grapes. So it could be the same grape varietal, right? Because every grape varietal has vastly different flavors sort of baked in, but try changing locations and the terroir influences now further change it. So he was one of the first people to go around and catalog the idea of the characteristics of each of the grape juices in all of these little parcels all throughout the region. So he tasted all the grape juices blindly, meaning he wasn't told what they were, where they were from. So he had an impartial view, was able to taste the juice, record the characteristics, and then was able to really segregate and separate out each parcel of land as having unique terroirs or unique grape juices. So that's what he did. He wasn't a blind monk where he couldn't see. He tasted blindly with no outside undue influence on his palate. Okay, so that's what he did. And this was remarkable because that becomes very instrumental later on. In the 1700s and early 1800s, lived a woman named Widow Clicquot, or Veuve Clicquot, and she inherited her husband's winery when he died, which was, at the time, no women were even allowed to own businesses, and only by decree of inheritance. And she really pioneered and created a method of making bubbles inside the wine on purpose, in a process called the method champenois. And again, I'm distilling this down really quick, but what she was able to do is understand what I explained before, which is, here you have all these grapes, you pluck them, you crush them, you have your yeast, you make your first wines, you let the bubbles escape. So you make flat wine, you make table wine. That's step one. You put it in the bottle. Step two, and yes, in theory, we could put a cork in it and you might get some natural second fermentation in that bottle by accident. Or you can make it happen on purpose. You can actually add a little scoop of yeast and sugar, and that is called the liqueur de tirage. You put it in, and then you cap it, and now on purpose, the new yeast and the new little sugar dose, that creates that second fermentation inside the bottle. Now you get your bubbles that are trapped inside the bottle, and okay, great, we have sparkling wine. However, the yeast that's in the bottle, it gets stuck in the bottle now, it's trapped, and when yeast effectively drowns in the alcohol and dies, and it starts settling down to the bottom, but sometimes it remains suspended in the juice, and dead yeast is very cloudy looking. It makes the wine look cloudy and weird. So for many, many decades, it was considered a flaw to have the cloudiness, and people would throw it away. Oh, it's ruined. But Widow Clicquot is like, how do I get the yeast out? If I can get rid of that cloudy appearance, we would have something really magical left in the bottle. But boy, how do you get it out without breaking the bubbles? Because in your imagination, how would you get out the dead yeast, which really kind of looks like pie dough or cookie dough, either in suspension or on the bottom, like a little pasty dough on the bottom of the bottle? How do you get it out? If you pour it through a filter, or pour it through a sieve, or pour it through anything, you break all the bubbles. You can't take a spoon and scoop it out, because again, you break the bubbles, or they start to, get agitated and will geyser up on you. Very tricky. And she came up with the process of basically putting the bottle inside a wooden rack that has holes drilled in it. So the bottle's basically horizontal, and you could spin the bottle, and that basically is called riddling the bottle. And what it does is it creates a little, here's a little physics lesson. We have a little bit of the, like that centrifuge. We have a little bit of centrifugal force, whereas the bottle spins, all that yeast kind of flies, outward with the spin. Flies out, hits the glass, and the bottle itself, which starts off here, the rack, the wooden rack that it's in, is actually shaped like an A-frame. So the bottles basically, they're able to open the A-frame a little bit more, a little wider. So the bottles start off, the neck of the bottle sticking in, and it kind of goes like this. And as they open the A-frame, the bottle starts tilting. So now there's an angle, and that yeast on that angle starts hitting the glass, but traveling down toward the neck. And so it gets all pulled to the neck of the bottle. And then they're able to take that bottle, stick it in ice, freeze that yeast that's stuck in the neck. I call that a yeasticle. And make a frozen yeast popsicle. And then pluck that out. They would freeze like a string in it, and they would able to pop it out. And then, boom, as soon as they pull out the yeasticle, they quickly put a cork back on that bottle, because you don't want to leave the bottle open. It still has the bubbles inside, but we've gotten rid of that dead yeast. This is the method champenois. It is really effectively a clarification process. It's the ability to create a secondary fermentation inside the bottle to create the bubbles, and then removing the cloudy yeast and making it clear, clarified. Okay, this is amazing. She also was groundbreaking in 62 million other ways. She is one of my heroes in the world, especially in the history of women. And I'm looking at Oprah, Barbara. That would be as in Streisand, and then in this case, Barb Nicole. That was her first name. Barb Nicole. Ponsardin was her maiden name, and Clicquot her married name. So those are great ladies in history. at the end of it all, you have a process that is the highlight of what the Champagne region had pioneered through her. But in reality, you can really do this method champenois anywhere in the world. It's a method, so you could do it in Nebraska if you want to. So okay, if that's the case, then why don't we go buy a bottle of sparkling wine from Nebraska and not pay $1 gajillion? Why do we have to buy it from Champagne? In addition to the lauded history that I just described, in addition to that, one of the most unique factors of the Champagne region is that it has a soil composition that exists almost nowhere else in the world. The soils that exist in Champagne and through this northern band in France, through little parts of Burgundy, and then if you almost follow the map up from northern France up to like England, it actually exists in England. And it was this type of soil was discovered in a town in England called Kimmeridge, so they call it Kimmeridgian soil, and it is basically a soil that consists of, not to get too nerdy, but it has a lot of limestone, which is one of the key mineral components for not only growing incredible Chardonnay and Pinot Noir grapes, but the grapes themselves. That soil creates a very notably way more charismatic and electrified kind of like acidity and volume of aromatics. So it is like an electric force for the grapes, is that soil of limestone. It's also then mixed with a little bit of this clay. So that's what's called marl. And clay is like I call it clay an agent of richness. It just increases the richness of flavor, the concentration of flavor. But most importantly, it has in the soils in this very unique part of the world, Jurassic era fossilized oyster shells. So you're talking about oysters. Well, the molecules of the oysters have been replaced now, obviously, with other mineral components. But you're talking about the fossilized components of oyster shells from 150 million years ago. It's a wild concept, and this gives the grape juice this, I don't know, again, call it, is it the imagination? A little bit of this oyster shell salinity, this little tiny, little salty little twang at the end of that champagne sip that you don't get with other sparkling wines in the world. And imagine that uniqueness. Ironically, by the way, you're going to start to see in stores a lot more sparkling wines coming out of England. And you're like, England? What are they doing making sparkling wine? But Kimmeridge, England, and that band of soil floating all the way down into the Champagne region really is the Champagne of England. And so with global warming, a lot of houses are buying, Champagne houses are buying land up in England now, and it's sort of like the other Champagne. Kind of a cool thing. If you see some English sparkling wines, you try them. See if you find them to be similar to sparkling wine from the actual Champagne region. Now, in sum, why do we pay so much for champagnes? It is an incredibly exclusive, unique, very limited soil composition that exists nowhere else in the world, combined with the legacy of the pioneering history and centuries of the winemaking techniques in such nuance as to yield perhaps the best versions of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier based blends for sparkling wine using the method champenois created by one of the coolest chicks of all time, the Widow Clicquot. Enjoy your champagne. If you can't afford the champagne, that's fine. Look for other bottles that use maybe perhaps just the method champenois, like a cava from Spain is a great example, or a Franciacorta from Italy is a great example. But when you have the ability to go buy that bottle of champagne, you'll think about all those nuances that I just described. You'll think about that oyster shell kind of salinity, and you'll think about the molecular precision based on a technique by the real OG winemakers of sparkling wine. And it's there, and you'll taste it, and you'll feel it. Cheers.